Introducing the Lisa Chill Collection, your answer to hot nights. These mattresses beat the heat with ultra-cool covers, whisking away heat for the perfect sleep temperature. Save up to $460 on Chill mattresses and get 2 free pillows when you shop now. iHeart listeners can save an extra $50 off by visiting lisa.com/iHeart. That's LEESA.com/iHeart. Exclusions apply. See lisa.com for more details.
Why?
If you have T-Mobile 5G home internet, you might be hearing this
Why?
a lot. Every time your internet slows down during the busiest hours.
Why?
Because your network gives priority to cell phone users.
Why?
Good question. Why not switch to Cox Internet with 2 times faster download speeds than T-Mobile 5G home internet during peak hours?
Okay.
Stop the whys and visit cox.com/5G home for details. T-Mobile prioritizes certain T-Mobile phone users over home internet users during times of congestion.
The NFL Draft is now officially open.
Happy New Year, everybody. And is this officially draft season? Nah, not yet. The NFL season's still going on, so not quite draft season. You still have the college football playoffs. Once we get past the national title game next week between Washington and Michigan, then it'll be the official start of draft season. But we continue to process and keep you up to date on what's going on. Tony, how was your New Year, my friend?
Okay, first of all, it's always draft season for me, so there's never really a break in draft season. But
And
it was.
by the way, Tony, that's why you're on the show, because it is always draft season.
There you go. My New Year was good. I hope everyone else's New Year out there went well and was safe. I'm a little bit under the weather, so if you hear me cough or I gotta wipe my nose or something, let me apologize in advance.
Well, Tony, I get it. You know, you spend 14 hours at Times Square like you do every year.
I used to do that. You know, I did that like in the 80s, from like 1980 to 1990. I went to Times Square every year.
No, you didn't.
Yes. And then they started to herd everybody into pens like cattle. I said, the heck with this. But back in the 80s, it was a lot of fun.
Was it really? Because it looks miserable. I got to be honest with you. I could not have less interest in doing it.
Yep. When back in the 80s, you used to be able to, say, get off at 56th Street and walk all the way up to the Times Square building unabated. It was not a problem. And then what happened was, I want to say late 80s, early 90s, they started where they would just pen the people into different areas. And I agree with you. I mean, now you got to get there at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and stand around for 10 hours or so to watch the ball drop for 60 seconds. So when you're young and you're in college, it's a fun thing to do. But I would agree with you. I wouldn't even get close to that place now.
I'm sure there were other interesting things happening during that celebration during the 80s, too, that we won't talk about on draft season. I'm sure it was a wild time, needless to say. It was a wild time in the college football playoffs yesterday. And, of course, with bowl season this weekend, and we'll get to the college football playoffs in a second, Tony. But as an old school guy who's obviously followed college football closely over the course of 20 years following the draft, I know this bowl season is kind of like a bummer now because there are so many really good players that just aren't playing in these games.
You know, you look at the Ohio State-Missouri game. I mean, Ohio State had no offense in that game because everybody opted out.
And you look
at what happened. You look at what happened with Florida State and Georgia. I mean, Florida State was on their third-string quarterback, and I think it really hit home yesterday on January 1st, where there were 2 games on: Tennessee, Iowa, and Oregon Liberty. And I'm watching Tennessee, Iowa, and Joe Milton, the quarterback from Tennessee, who started his career at Michigan, who is a very talented player who started, I believe, 12 games in his college career. He's got great amount of upside, which he's never met, decided to opt out of the game against Iowa to prepare for the draft. And I don't know what Joe Milton gains by opting out of that game against Iowa. Then if you turned over and watched Oregon against Liberty, you're seeing Bo Nix play. You're seeing Bucky Irving play. You're seeing, the majority. I think they had 2 guys who opted out. They had the receiver, Troy Franklin, and the center. But I'm watching Bo Nix play in the bowl game, the Fiesta Bowl, and I'm watching Joe Milton, who opted out, and I'd say there's something wrong with this pitcher. Bo Nix I have him as a second-round pick. Some people think he can go the first round. I mean, Joe Milton, he's a day 3 pick. Maybe he's a third-round pick if he has a great Senior Bowl week. But right now, he's basically a 5th, 6th-round pick. I don't understand the thinking with some of these guys who opted out. And you could see, I mean, most of those bowl games, the New Year's Day bowl games, which are usually filled to the brim, those stadiums were half full. And I think it's really having a very negative effect in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and look, and I think that's the most exciting thing about the college football playoffs next year, expanding the way it is, Tony. Selfishly for us who are doing this for draft evaluation reasons, right? Fewer opt-outs. You know, if these teams are in the college football playoffs and they're going to have a lot of prospects because they're good teams, right? More guys are going to play in these games, which I think is going to be a lot of fun.
You think, but I mean, if you're the eighth ranked team and the eighth ranked team has a quarterback or a cornerback that's going to be a top 20 pick, it's going to be an interesting thing to see whether we have opt-outs from those lower rated teams in the playoffs. I don't think it's a guarantee that all these guys are going to play.
A chance
we'll see what
to
happens.
Play like the 1 seed and upset them in round 1. I can't imagine players would opt out of that, would they?
It'll be bad optics. But again, why did Joe Milton opt out of the Iowa game yesterday? I mean, it was a good defense. It turned out that Tennessee destroyed him anyway. So you never know with some of these decisions. What happens is people get into these players' ears, family members, the agents, whoever, no reason to play. Or it could be the kid himself. No reason to play in the bowl game. It's going to be an interesting dynamic if it happens.
Yeah, it'll be something worth keeping an eye on. Absolutely. It's funny. I was talking to Dory Jackson in the locker room over here last week, and we were talking about, USC and he's a USC guy, Caleb Williams opting out. And he goes, look, I get it, but I don't. And he's like, I played in a bowl game. And if you remember, Tony, he hurt himself in the bowl game. And he goes, I don't care. I wouldn't have changed anything. I wanted to play in the game. You're playing for your teammates. You're trying to be a competitor. I wanted to play in the game, and I got hurt, and I still wouldn't go back and change that. So it's funny to get different players' perspectives on these sorts of things.
And there have been some major injuries. Remember the Jalen Smith, the linebacker from Notre Dame, which was a devastating injury. Remember Jake Butt, the tight end, going down with a knee injury in his bowl game, his senior season. Unfortunately, it does happen. It could happen in the bowl game. It could happen in the first game of the season. But I think just like everything else in college football, it's gone too far to one side of the spectrum with these opt-outs at this point.
All right, guys, very busy show today. So we're going to talk about all the bowl games. Obviously, we have some Senior Bowl announcements. We have a draft announcement. And then if we have time at the end, maybe I'll do a couple of Twitter questions. We're also going to do an update on the draft order and how that might be impacted by the games this weekend. But, Tony, let's start with the bowl games. And I suppose we need to start with the college football playoffs, 2 games that literally went down to the last play. I mean, you cannot get more dramatic games. I'm on very little sleep because I stayed up for that for that Washington game. I am exhausted, but it was worth it. It looked like Washington had the game in hand. A silly penalty on the punt at the end. They had an unfortunate injury to their running back that stopped the clock when they're running the clock out. It gave Texas a chance to get the ball down. They had 3 chances at the end zone, and they just couldn't punch it in, and Washington held on for the win.
From a game point of view, I mean, I thought Washington kept the Texas Longhorns in that game from the get-go because that game really, it looked like it could have been a blowout for Washington.
You had the fumble on the punt return too, right early.
From the get-go. I mean, to me, it looked like Washington was playing as though it was a do-or-die game. Texas looked like they were playing the first game of the season. They just looked unprepared. They didn't seem to be a sense of urgency. I think with Washington, you got to start off with Michael Penix. He was tremendous. And they talked about a story in the game yesterday about how the day before the game, Michael Penix asked all the coaches to leave the locker room, and he had a players-only meeting, which he held for 20 minutes, and everybody was like stunned silence. And that's what you want from your quarterback. That's what you want from your leader. And then we saw the best of Michael Penix. I talked about him being streaky, being inconsistent. You didn't see that yesterday. No. Really, right from the get-go. The deep passes were beautiful. The intermediate passes were on the mark. He played smart, mistake-free football. When he had to take off and run up the field and run, he was able to do it productively. He ran that offense flawlessly. I think, you do not want to really give a guy, grade a guy off of one performance, especially the Texas game where their secondary is very suspect.
Tell that to C.J. Stroud, Tony.
There you go. But the thing about C.J. Stroud was we kind of knew that about C.J. Stroud. It was more a coaching thing.
And it was also against Georgia, by the way, which is a big deal.
Right. But the thing with Penix, he was phenomenal. I mean, all credit to him. He's liked by his teammates. I hope hopefully we'll see him at the Senior Bowl. There's a lot to be played. I still don't think he's a first-round pick, but, he was very impressive yesterday. The leadership, the passing, the decision-making deserves a tremendous amount of credit.
Yeah, and look, you saw the bevy of Washington receivers as his targets, right? He spread the ball around. Their tight end had a handful of catches. Jalen McMillan had 5 catches for 58 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Polk continues to erupt this year. 5 catches, 122 yards and a touchdown. And Rome Odunze was Rome Odunze. Just another day of the office, 6 catches, 125 yards. All 3 of those players are going to be drafted, Tony. I wouldn't be shocked if all 3 of those players are gone by the end of day 2, the way Polk has played at the end of this year. So, just really good players, and they all kind of have a little bit of a different skill set.
Use the tight ends very well, Westover and Culp. They were involved in the action. And you're right. I mean, early on, it was Odunze and Polk. McMillan wasn't involved. Second half, McMillan got involved. And, again, it was Penix running the show, distributing the ball to all his receivers, using all his targets. And before the injury, the running back had played very well. He even played very well during the injury. He was out on the field, and I like the way, even though he had an injured foot, what the coaches would do if you watch a couple plays, they would send him out on the flanks as a wideout to basically draw a man out on cover a guy that was injured, and they'd run the ball on the inside. It was a terrific overall game from Washington. I think the other guy who really, first of all, their offensive tackles, I thought had a terrific game. Fanadu, who is the left tackle, who some people project as the first guard taken off the board. Rosengarten, who, if you read my piece at Sportskeeda yesterday, I'm told he is going to enter the draft once Washington season's over. He's a guy who I project as a second-round pick. Others say third, but if you watch him, he's got power. He's got mobility. He can get out on the second level. I thought their offensive tackles played very well. And then Braylon Trice. I mean, he was a disruptor yesterday. He was incredible all over the place, rushing on the edge. They stunted him in the middle. He was able to penetrate the line of scrimmage. I thought the Texas offensive line, especially Christian Jones, the right tackle, had a really difficult day yesterday. And it was an excellent team effort from Washington. Their stars stood out and really did what they had to do, but they got contributions from everybody.
2 guys I want to focus on here, Tony, and you just mentioned Braylon Trice, so I'll go there first. I know a lot of people say he's not going to test well. I don't know what you're hearing on that front, but he is so gosh darn productive. It's going to be hard to keep that dude out of the end of the first round. It just is.
It depends on what your definition of not testing well is. I'm told he's going to run a low 4.7s at over 270 pounds.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, maybe he only vertical jumps 29 inches. They're not doing vertical jumps on Sunday, but, it obviously is a measure. Guy can play football. And like I said, they showed him, they displayed him in a variety of roles yesterday as an edge rusher up the middle. Excellent movement skills, can play off the line of scrimmage, and came up big for him.
Yeah, and he's powerful, too. He's strong. And then Rome Odunze. It's just funny. You watch him, and again, I think the conversation, him versus Malik Neighbors for wide receiver 2, is going to be one that's going to be fun throughout the year because they're so different with the way they play. And when you watch Odunze, everything is just so smooth. Contested catches, he's just unbothered by the defenders near him. He's able to adjust to the ball in the air. He makes everything look so smooth and easy, and he makes difficult catches look like just a day at the park for him. And, he's a guy that has, I think, can really do a little bit of everything. I don't think there's a hole in his game, Tony. I wonder about, the explosiveness and things like that. But, I mean, my goodness, the numbers and just the breadth of the things he can do. And, again, the way he makes catches down the field in traffic look easy, somebody's going to get a really good wide receiver when they pick him in the draft. I would say probably in the top 15 picks this year.
Well, that 65-yard, 66-yard bomb where it was the over-the-shoulder catch with the defender draped on his back was a thing of beauty. Now, here's the thing about, the testing. And I've said all along, the thing about Odunze is, he's going to have trouble separating at the next level, or he looks like he's going to have trouble separating to the next level. You got to remember, in the lead up to the combine, a lot of these guys never had any track training. They really don't know how to run. They know how to play football and how to run, but they don't know how to run for the stopwatch. So what's going to happen is after Washington's season is over next week, Odunze is going to have to decide whether or not he's playing in the Senior Bowl. He'll start training for the combine. They'll then teach him running techniques, which, he's projected to be a 4.51 guy, Who knows? Maybe all of a sudden now he's a low 4-4 guy. But yeah, he's a guy, again, like Michael Penix, just continually answers the bell, continually comes up in the big spot. And there's no let up in this guy. And I would agree with you. I still have Malik Nabers as my number 2 wideout for a variety of reasons, primarily because LSU receivers have been great in the NFL. And Nabers is a guy who continually gets better. I don't know that Odunze gets better, but he just continually performs at a very high level.
All right, let's jump over to Texas here, Tony. Let's start with their offense. Quinn Ewers, rough first half. He finished 24-38 for 318 yards and a touchdown. Came on later in the game. Your guy, Jatavian Sanders, had a nice game, 6 catches, 75 yards. Whittington, a wide receiver we talked about last week, I think we got a question about him via Twitter, if I recall. He had 4 catches for 70 yards. And then the 2 wide receivers that people think could be, late first rounders, early second rounders, Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell, just 2 for 45 for Worthy. He could have had another deep one, but he lost the ball on the lights, couldn't see it. And then Mitchell was 4 for 32 in this game, and he had a couple catches late. Otherwise, he was very quiet.
The thing about those stats, especially with Sanders, is a lot of it was garbage stats in the sense that going into the fourth quarter, I think Mitchell had 1 catch. I don't know if Worthy had a catch. I think Sanders had 2 or 3 catches. So they really were a non-factor. It was when Texas basically threw everything against the wall, those stats started to improve. I agree. It was not a good game by Quinn Ewers. I think he had problems because the offensive line couldn't seem to get anything going. They couldn't get the running game going. Go back to Christian Jones, the right tackle. Some people project him as a 4th-round choice. He looked like an undrafted free agent most of the night last night. But the left tackle, who's a sophomore, had his struggles. The center, Jake Majors, who I like a lot, I thought he played reasonably well. It just seemed to me that they really weren't prepared. As I said at the beginning, Washington played like it was a do or die game. Texas, it looked like it was the first game of the season they came out. There was no continuity. There was no tempo. They seemed to get it early, but in the second quarter, but they couldn't keep it going. And a lot of that, had to do with Washington. They go for it on the 4th down early. They don't make it. They give Texas the ball back. There was just no tempo. There's no rhythm on that Texas offense. Ewers was okay. He was getting beat up. There were a lot of turnovers. He had some drop passes. Texas was just off last night. Washington played great, but Texas was off.
You're still hearing yours is going to go back to school, right?
That's what excuse me. That's what I heard as of last week. Yeah, he's going to go back to school. Everybody talks about Arch Manning. I was told that Manning's family is okay with him sitting on the sidelines for another year. Some people are not all that high on Arch Manning. It's more name and name recognition than anything else. But I had heard as of last week, Ewers is going to go back to school.
And then just finally, I don't want to go back to Penix again, but again, we talk about the negatives with the transfer portal sometimes, Tony. This is the positive, right?
Yeah.
The kid finally gets healthy, goes to Washington. I mean, if he would have came out after his final year in Indiana, he's like a 6th-round pick, something like that, if that, with all his injury issues. And he is just taking advantage of this opportunity. Good for him.
And the thing is this, go back to what I said last week. With these quarterbacks, whether it's Bo Nix, whether it's Michael Penix, whether it's Jaden Daniels, this is his 2nd year in that Washington program, in that Washington season. You go to the quarterbacks that transferred, only played 1 year, Sam Hartman at Notre Dame. We all thought that Sam Hartman, we saw what he did at Wake Forest. We thought, wow, now he's going to Notre Dame. They're going to contend for the college football playoffs. Never happened. I mean, Sam Hartman's game, I think this year, took a step back than where he was as a senior at Wake Forest. So I think there's something to be said for those quarterbacks who are in those transfer and are in those programs for 2 years.
Yeah, we'll see what Riley Leonard does at Notre Dame now coming up next year and how long he stays there. All right, let's go to the other game, Tony. Again, a game that went to overtime. Michigan defeats Alabama 27-20. Well, we just talked about the quarterbacks. Let's start there with J.J. McCarthy. A typical J.J. McCarthy type of game, right? 17-27, 221 yards, 3 touchdowns. He leads that game-tying touchdown drive. Had 2 throws on the drive that were significant. One was really just a dump off to Blake Corum that he ran for a big game. Part of it got called back because of a holding penalty, if I recall. And then he had that deep over route but that gets partially tipped at the line of scrimmage. So we don't even know what that throw looks like if it doesn't get tipped. Is it accurate? Does it hit the receiver? I don't know the answer to that question. But look, McCarthy was good. He was solid. He showed off his arm. He showed off his mobility. He had some a couple of throws that maybe weren't as accurate as you want, but for the most part, I think he was accurate. Your thought on what McCarthy showed against Alabama?
If you compare J.J. McCarthy to Jalen Milroe, and I was thinking about this watching the game, Jalen McCarthy is a big-time playmaker. Jalen Milroe makes big-time plays with his arm. And I don't know that J.J. McCarthy can do that. But the fact is this. He leads that offense. He's in command of the situation. You know, he knows how to run the offense. He's a cocky, confident guy. I agree with you. That's always been my concern with J.J. McCarthy is that he doesn't have that great next-level arm. He's not a guy like Penix or Milroe who can, drive the ball 60 yards down or 40 yards downfield, can drive the outs, through the tight spots. But he does a great job running the offense. And I think he's going to end up as the, fourth quarterback off the board, probably a first round pick because of the need of quarterbacks. I think he's one of those guys that in a realistic world, you're going to give him a second round grade, but because he's a quarterback, he's going to end up as a first round pick. And I was even told last night, he's going to enter the draft.
Okay. Good to know. Running game, obviously a big part of what they do. Blake Corum, 19 rushes, 83 yards, a touchdown. We saw his kind of shiftiness, change of direction with a couple jump cuts during the game. Just doesn't have that top speed. You know what he kind of reminds me of, Tony? Who's had a really good year in the NFL this year, and maybe it will help Blake Corum. He reminds me of Kyren Williams a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. And as I said about Blake Corum, he's not a great athlete. He's like the Brown kid from Illinois a year ago, if you will.
Yeah,
That's
Chase Brown.
Yeah, he reminds me of that. He's just a really good football player. And, he's basically indicative of Michigan. We said previewing the game, if you looked at the board, Alabama had the top talent in this game. But Michigan, it would go back to when we talked with Bruce Feldman. Michigan is just so well coached. They play great team football. Everybody steps up. They don't have superior talent, but they all do their part. And I think Blake Corum is indicative of that. And I think, he's probably a guy who's going to go in the third round. He may not be a feature runner, but I think in the right role, he's going to be very productive as both a ball carrier, a pass catcher, and even a blocker, on third down situations when you leave him in the backfield.
I would like to see Donovan Edwards go back to school, Tony, to see him as the feature back. I think his stock went down from last year to this year. He just wasn't as explosive. And then I'd like to see Roman Wilson, if he gets the invite, go to the Senior Bowl to, see what he does in a less Michigan-y system, right, where they're not throwing the ball a ton.
Shifty guy, Roman Wilson, a guy who, made that catch. That tip ball was the one that went to Roman Wilson's hand, so he's got the focus, concentration. He was the one that also had that bad penalty on the Blake Corum screen pass because he blocked the defender in the back. I mean, it was a blatant block in the back. I think what you're going to see with Roman Wilson is he's a good receiver, but teams are going to look at him. His real great value at the next level will also be as a return specialist. And that's something to keep an eye on if he plays at the Senior Bowl.
And then for Michigan's defense, Tony, real quick, dominant up front. In the first half, Alabama just couldn't even drop back to throw with the type of pressure they were getting. I did not think it was a great game for J.C. Latham, the Alabama right tackle. Even on that final run play, Tony, where they're trying to run it in from the 3-yard line in overtime, he gets pushed back into the backfield. And that's one of the reasons that run got disrupted. But Michael Barrett a sack, Josiah Stewart a sack, 2 sacks for Braden McGregor, Chris Jenkins, Derek Moore with the sack apiece. So that Michigan front really took it to that Alabama offensive line throughout this game.
And their second tier, Junior Colson, the linebacker, was phenomenal yesterday. And Junior Colson's a guy who, coming into the season, I had him graded as a potential second-round pick. I moved him in the third round. I talked with someone. They said, the production wasn't there. That is a concern. I'm told Junior Colson, I've reported this previously, is going to enter the draft. The fact that he didn't have good production during the regular season is going to be a question that scouts talked to him about during interviews, but the production was there last night. He was all over the field, making plays behind the line of scrimmage, making plays against the run. Really, you saw the best of Junior Colson, who was a terrific linebacker yesterday. And as I've reported, I am told he's going to enter the draft. Rod Moore, the safety, also made some big time plays. He's a big guy. He's got decent range. He's a guy who's also considering the draft. Let's say he's about 50-50 right now, from what I hear.
And then Alabama's offense, Tony, it's not a whole lot. I mean, they ran for 172 yards, but it took 43 carries to do it. That's only 4 yards per carry. I thought your guy Jason McClellan had a nice game, 14 carries, 87 yards. We saw Jalen Milroe. Again, the pressure had a lot to do with it, but just 116 yards passing. Any of this besides McClellan, and please talk about him, anyone else from the Alabama offense jump out at you?
Well, they didn't have too much offense. So the answer is no. I was surprised that they didn't, when Milroe was getting pounded, they didn't try and just run the ball more with McClellan, because every time McClellan touched the ball, he had a positive run. Even when it was bottled up on the inside, he would gain 3 or 4 yards. And, he did I looked at the stats, I think it was midway through the third quarter or maybe halftime, and he only had 9 carries. But he was averaging close to 8 yards, 7 yards a carry. And I was surprised that they did not go more to the running game and have Michigan's focus go towards McClellan. Here's the thing about McClellan. I think he's going to be drafted after Blake Corum. He's probably going to be a early day 3 pick. Maybe he's a 3rd round pick. But I think in the right system, he's going to be a terrific player at the next level. He just knows how to pick up yardage. He's got great vision. He's got great football instincts. He's a productive ball carrier. He's got an NFL build. And he was really the only bright spot in an Alabama offense that seemingly couldn't do anything yesterday.
We haven't talked a bunch about Alabama's 2 wide receivers, Tony, Isaiah Bond and Jermaine Burton. This is the second year now where Alabama, after a streak of 4 straight years where they had a first-round wide receiver, we're not going to see one again. Your thoughts on those 2 guys, Isaiah Bond and Jermaine Burton?
Burton got hurt. Burton is a guy who has shown big playability in the past. He's a junior. I'd be surprised, especially if he got a little bit. He got cramped up yesterday. I had to take him off the field. He's been spotty, but Jalen Milroe has been developing too. And as we talked about, Malik Neighbors' success was tied in with Jaden Daniels. I think it's much the same with Jermaine Burton. Isaiah Bond has come on, true sophomore. He's not draft eligible. He's made some big plays. He's got an upside. We'll have to see if he can capitalize on the good things he showed. Excuse me. I did think that getting back to Alabama, I thought their corners played relatively well yesterday. I thought both Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry both played well. Malachi Moore had his struggles. I really didn't see Dallas Turner too much last night.
He had the 1 sack.
Chris Braswell, he was here and there, but I thought both of their corners, as much in run defense as well as coverage, played very well last night.
Yeah, Turner had the 1 sack. I feel like I did see him in the backfield a little bit, but I thought Braswell was very quiet. He just had 1 tackle on the game. And you still think he's 50-50, Tony, whether or not he comes out?
I think after last night, I was told that he was leaning towards going back, and then he was maybe thinking of entering. I'd be surprised if, I shouldn't say I'd be surprised. I'm told it's still 50-50. Some people think he's going to leave. Some people think he's going to enter. Like I said, just to go back to I repeat what I said last week, I'm told he had a conversation with Saban. Saban told him, right now, you're a 3rd round, maybe 2nd round pick. If you go back and you capitalize on this season and you do it, you basically blow it out next year, you'll be a 1st round pick in 2025. And Saban's honest with his players. If they're early 1st round picks, McKinstry, Arnold, you got to go if you're going to be a 1st round pick. I'm told that Braswell's basically thinking a lot about what Coach Saban told him.
Yeah, I'm sorry for doing a little U-turn here, but we did not mention the 2 Texas defensive players I wanted to mention. T'Vondre Sweat, he won the top defensive lineman in the Big 12 this year, right? And then he was fine. He had 3 tackles in the game, but their other defensive tackle, who also I believe had a touchdown running the football, right, as the fullback in that game, Byron Murphy. He is explosive, Tony. He gets in the backfield. He's a good athlete. Every time I see that guy, I like him more and more.
I'm gonna correct you what you said there. You said he's a good athlete. He is a great athlete. I've been told for the longest time when he goes to the combine, he's going to be about 295 pounds. He's probably going to run under 4.8. Could run in the low 4.7s. And you see that athleticism on the film.
Yeah,
you
Tony, that's the thing. When you,
closing speed.
honestly, I'm sorry for interrupting. I didn't realize he was 295. He plays like he's 280.
Well, he's going to be 295 at the combine. So he's probably he could be about 290 pounds now. But you see that athleticism on the film. The stats weren't great last night, but he was a disruptive force. He's quick off the snap. He's got a great closing burst. They were focusing on him. Sweat is more the guy, at the next level is more of the gap occupier. Murphy's the playmaker. He's a phenomenal athlete. He's got tremendous upside. In my last mock draft at sportskeeda.com, I had him as a first-round pick. I think as we get closer to the draft, you're going to hear more first-round buzz on Byron Murphy.
I would be absolutely fine picking him in the second half of the first round. He looks like a really good player to me. Yeah, especially against a good line. And it's not like Washington doesn't have a really good offensive line, right? And he was the one guy that I thought was disruptive for that Texas defense. All right, let's jump over. I'm sorry, Tony, you want to add something?
Yeah, their tackles were phenomenal. I think Texas was able to exploit them a little bit in the middle of the line.
Yeah.
But I wholeheartedly agree with you about Murphy.
All right, let's jump over to that Oregon game against Liberty you mentioned. And Bo Nix, phenomenal again, 28 of 35, 363 yards, 5 touchdowns. Bucky Irving, 14 for 117. And then their other wide receiver, Tez Johnson, with a monster game, 11 catches for 172 yards and a touchdown.
I don't know that you could take too much out of that game. I mean, Liberty was just so overmatched. I mean, Oregon was so overwhelming in that game, and you could see it early on. Liberty could never get back into that game. And Johnson right now, I have a 5th-round grade on him coming into the season. He's a 4th-year senior, but scouts basically ignored him. Good for him for stepping up next year. We'll see if he enters the draft. There's a couple of those guys I think I had mentioned. Jordan Birch, the defensive end from Oregon, who's not declared yet. They're offering him, like I was told, $1 million NIL deal to come back.
And by the way, Birch did play in that game too. So the
only guys who didn't play in the game were Troy Franklin and Powers Johnson, I think, were the only 2 Oregon guys or main Oregon guys that opted out of that game. But again, I mean, I don't know that you can take much out of that game except for the fact that maybe Liberty probably shouldn't have been in that game. Because they were just so overmatched by Oregon.
Yeah, sometimes the level of the athlete, right, is just so different. It doesn't matter how well coached you are, how well you execute. Just the better athletes are going to come out on top. All right, you have a couple other games you wanted to get into, Tony. Peach Bowl. Hayden Priestcorn from Ole Miss, monster game, 10 catches, 136 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's a name we have not mentioned so far on this year's worth of episodes on draft season.
And he is a guy who he came into the season. I'm looking at it now. He transferred from Memphis, came into the season, was given 3rd-round grades by scouts, kind of had an up and down year, just blew it open against in the Peach Bowl, had a great game. Here's something that I was told. I was told that both Hayden Priestcorn and their receiver that everybody loves, Trey Harris, very likely to go back to school next year. They're both seniors. They were both graded by scouts coming into the year. Trey Harris got a 6th-round grade. Priestcorn got a 3rd-round grade. I'm told that they're very likely, or the word is, they're going to go back to school with Jackson Dart. And you're going to be looking at Mississippi, Ole Miss next year as one of the front runners for the SEC West. I thought they'd be a front runner this year. They hit a bump in the road early on. They couldn't beat Alabama. But most of that Mississippi team's going back. Getting back to Priestcorn, 6'5.5", 262 pounds. He's your Michael Mayer type, if you will. He's not the downfield threat on a consistent basis, but he's just a well-rounded, complete tight end who can block, who catches the ball well in the short and intermediate field, who plays smart football, who is your more conventional type of tight end if you don't have an offense where you want the tight end, running 30 yards down the field.
All right, and then a guy we have mentioned in the Cotton Bowl, Cody Schrader, Tony, continues to impress, 129 yards and a touchdown. And again, I don't think maybe the tape isn't indicative. My guess is that he's not going to test particularly well, but he was a guy, and you made this point on an earlier show, you did not have him graded as a draftable player before this year, and now, he's going to be probably like a 4th or 5th-round pick.
Nobody did. I mean, none of the scouting sheets had him drafted. Truman State transfer, a great story. And the thing about him is, you look at you just mentioned the stats. His blocking was outstanding too in that game. I mean, he's a guy who's well-rounded in all areas of the game. He has accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl. And again, we talked about Blake Corum. We talked about Chase McClellan. Schrader's a guy who's probably going to be a late round pick, 6th round. I don't think he gets in the 5th round, but he's just going to find a nice role at the next level and be productive at it. And it's a great story.
All right, let's go to Duke's Mayo Bowl. And a guy, I love his name, Power Eccles, with 11 tackles in the game, Tony.
Cedric Gray opted out of this game. Power Eccles, who's a little bit smaller than Cedric Gray, who's got a 3rd round grade, a little bit smaller, but he's more explosive. He's outstanding in pursuit. He's a better coverage linebacker, more of your conventional 4-3 weak side linebacker, if you will. Go sideline to sideline, not a big blitzer, but a guy that it just jumps off the film on you in the sense that he's very athletic. He can go sideline to sideline. He can get from point A to point B to make the tackle very quickly. I was told early on he was considering entering the draft. I don't know if playing in the Mayo Bowl is a sign that he's going to return back to North Carolina. But if he enters the draft, I think he's a 3rd round pick. He is really a 3-down linebacker and a guy that's great in space. You're just not going to ask him to blitz all that much.
All right, let's go to the Gator Bowl. J.J. Weaver impressed you. 5 tackles, 2 tackles for losses, 2 sacks. Tell us about J.J. Weaver. We even talked about him on draft season so far this year.
Yeah, Weaver's the exact opposite. Weaver is your 3-4 outside, up the field type linebacker. 6'4.5", 245 pounds, runs and plays in the 4-7. But you stand him up over tackle. I think he had like 8 sacks this year, 7.5 tackles for loss. Those numbers may be reversed. Gets a lot of force up the field. I know that Jim Nagy early on was tweeting a lot about him, liked him a lot. He's kind of fallen off. I've not seen any invitation to the Senior Bowl or to the Shrine Game. But again, if you're looking for a situational pass rusher, his draft stock will be directly related to how fast he runs. He's got to run the 4.75 area. If he does, he's going to slide into day 3 and some 3-4 outside linebacker. Some 3-4 outside team defensive scheme is going to draft him in the late rounds and use him as a situational pass rusher.
You mentioned the Senior Bowl, Tony. Let's get to that. We have some more invitations that were accepted. I guess all the guys that played for Georgia decided, let's all do this at the same time. So 2 wide receivers, Ladd McConkey and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, both saying they're going to the Senior Bowl, and then defensive back Tyke Smith. Tell the folks about those 3 players.
Yeah, McConkey, he's everybody loves McConkey. I mean, he's smart. He's reliable. He's more of a possession wideout. He's a day 2 pick. Doesn't have great size, 5'11", 180 pounds. Doesn't have great speed. He's your Blake Corum at the receiver position, if you will. He's not going to wow anybody the way he looks, the way he tests, but he's just a terrific football player, and he's a return specialist. Rosemy-Jacksaint was graded by some scouts as a 7th round pick coming into the year. He's very consistent. He's got good length. He catches the ball well. I think, having him go to the Senior Bowl adds a little bit of hometown flavor. I don't think, if he gets drafted, if he runs fast, he's going to have to run fast to get drafted. And if he gets drafted, it's going to be in the late rounds.
And how about Tyke Smith, the defensive back?
Tyke Smith, I'm very glad to see he had the season he did. What happened was 3 years ago, he played at West Virginia. He was phenomenal. He looked like a 1st-round choice. He transferred to Georgia, had to basically compete for playing time there. He got injured. He injured his knee. He missed most of 2021, struggled in 2022. His game really took off this year. The guy's got great ball skills. The guy's got decent size. It's a matter of him. Is he completely healthy? Can he get back to where he was at West Virginia? If he does, he's going to be a steal in day 3. He played very well this year at Georgia, basically some reminiscent of his days back at West Virginia. He's got some big-time talent. Not the biggest guy in the world, but a real good football player.
All right, we got 2 more. Cody Schrader, somebody we already talked about. Then you have Ray Davis, the Kentucky running back, and then Georgia State, Jontre Hunter. Tony, pick out who you want to talk about from that group.
Talk about Jontre Hunter because probably nobody knows him because nobody watches Georgia State, right? Jontre Hunter is a little bit of a smaller guy, but he's very athletic. I just did my Georgia State film literally this weekend. He's a guy who goes sideline to sideline. He's instinctive. He does a great job making the defensive calls. He gets some force up the field, but he goes sideline to sideline, a little bit smaller, struggles taking on blocks. I think Hunter, who was not even graded by scouts coming into the year, had a terrific year. I think he's a day 3 guy. He could be your nickel linebacker, where when it's 3rd and 5, and they may run the ball, they may pass the ball, you put him on the field because he does a good job in coverage, also does an excellent job in pursuit. Like you said, going to the Senior Bowl. So what's going to happen is, you want to watch him in those coverage drills. You also want to see him in those blocking drills. When they have they have the running backs and the fullbacks go up against the linebackers, and they go all out in those blocking drills. Want to see how Hunter does. Is he able to hold his ground, or is he getting flattened? I think right now he's going to struggle because he looks a little bit small. He's not as strong, but he's a very good athlete, and he's got excellent range.
Absolutely. All right. We did get, we got to talk about one more guy declaring for the NFL draft, which I think was a little bit of a surprise, Tony, because I think he was in the transfer portal and people expected him to transfer, but instead Cam Ward will be in the NFL draft. Give the fans an idea of what Cam Ward's all about for those that might not know him, and what range are we looking at for him when he comes out?
Yeah, it's not a surprise to me because when this whole transfer portal started, I said to you, and I even wrote on Sportskeeda, what would happen is a lot of these guys would enter the transfer portal to kind of test the free agent market, to see what kind of NIL deals they got. And if they didn't get the NIL deal they wanted, they would enter the draft or maybe go back to their original school. We saw it last year with Grayson McCall. Entered the transfer portal, didn't get what he wanted, went back to Coastal Carolina, entered the transfer portal again this year. Not a surprise with Cam Ward, especially with the situation with the Washington State football program. Cam Ward has already accepted an invitation to the Shrine Bowl, so I'll see him at the Shrine Bowl. Cam Ward is a big, athletic quarterback who's got a huge arm. He makes a lot of plays with his legs, but sometimes you don't know where the ball is going to go. I mean, his pass placement and his accuracy leaves a lot to be developed. He's got all the physical tools. He's just got to improve his mechanics. He's got to improve his accuracy, if you will. I think he's a day 3 type of guy who's got a lot of upside, but he needs a lot of work on his game from the ground up.
All right. I do have questions from Twitter again. I put another tweet out there, got some good responses, but we're already 40 minutes into this, and I wanted to get to one more topic. So we'll either get to them next week or the following, guys. We still got 4 months of draft coverage as you get ready for the NFL draft at the end of April. So make sure you hang with us here. All right. So we have 1 week left in the NFL season, Tony, and we have an idea of what the NFL draft order looks like, but still a lot to be decided this weekend. One thing we do know is that the Chicago Bears, via the Carolina Panthers, will have the first overall pick in the draft. And Tony, this is really why teams are hesitant trading first-round picks, because they can turn into this. And you want to talk about the absolute worst-case scenario for the Carolina Panthers? That's what this is. Look, I'm not saying Bryce Young's not going to be a good player. We both liked him a lot last year. I think he's in a terrible situation there. But to trade that first-round pick to move up last year to get Bryce Young, and then you're picking first this year when 2, maybe 3 better quarterback prospects are available in this year's draft, man, that is a rough go if you're a Panther fan right there.
Not only that, is the quarterback that was selected right after Bryce Young is setting all kinds of rookie records, and his team is in it in the last week of the season for a potential playoff spot. So, it's just horrible optics, and you're not going to be able to get the left tackle at the top of the draft to protect Bryce Young. So, exactly. I mean,
or Marvin Harrison Jr. Take your pick.
And the thing is, I didn't think that there would be a huge market last year to move up to that top pick, to get Bryce Young. Obviously, I was wrong, but obviously it shows, how quarterbacks are so overdrafted. And I agree with you. Can't throw the towel in on Bryce Young, but there's a lot of things there that are very alarming. We'll have to see how it plays out. And Chicago looks like geniuses now. I mean, they have 2 first-round picks. They're going to be selecting at the top of the draft. Probably going to take Caleb Williams. I mean, Justin Fields. I don't know that you can move. I don't know that you can move forward with him when you have the opportunity to draft Caleb Williams.
And he's playing well, Tony. It's not his fault.
I mean, he's playing okay. I mean, he looks more like a better runner who passes on occasion. I just don't know that you can stick with Justin Fields when you have the ability to draft Caleb Williams, although there's no guarantees on Caleb Williams, but he looks he looks like a dynamic a quarterback for the next level, and good for the Bears. And then after that, it's anybody's guess. I mean, Washington could have the second pick of the draft. The Patriots play the Jets, have the second pick of the draft, could have the second pick of the draft. Arizona's there 4-12 after their upset victory over Philadelphia. We were talking. It's funny because we were talking. The Giant fans had to be happy. They played a great game against the Rams. It came down to the final field goal. Their third kicker missed the field goal. Okay, they lost the game, but they kept draft positioning, where Arizona pulled it out against the Philadelphia Eagles, and you got to wonder what the Arizona fans are thinking. You never play to lose. I mean, you can't keep playing for draft positioning because it never works out. You want your team to win, but I understand what the fans are thinking. The Arizona fans are probably thinking, man, I really wish we would have lost that game by 3 points rather than winning, because we would have had the second pick of the draft and show ourselves with Marvin Harrison or one of the offensive tackles if we want to go in that direction.
Yeah, right now they're sitting at 4. Those 3 teams are 4-12, Tony, to your point. Washington plays Dallas this week, and Dallas needs that game for the NFC East. So, I mean, look, weird things have happened. We saw Arizona beat Philly last week, but that would be the upset of the century if Washington beats Dallas this week, right? New England, they have the Jets.
Right.
Who knows?
Right.
When those 2 teams play each other. And then Arizona has to play Seattle, and Seattle's playing for a potential playoff spot in the NFC. So, those 3 teams, will be battling it out. And then there are 3 teams at 5-11 with the Giants. They're taking on the Eagles this week at home. The way the Eagles are playing, I mean, I think anyone could beat Philadelphia at this point, right?
And Giants were in that game 2 weeks ago. I mean,
absolutely.
They could have won that game 2 weeks ago.
Chargers are playing the Chiefs, and the Chiefs obviously a playoff team. And then Tennessee, we got to see if Will Levis. I didn't get an update on his injury yet. He had to leave that game last week. They have Jacksonville, and Jacksonville's playing for a playoff spot. So then you have one team at 6-10 in the Jets. So that 1 through 8, I think, is really going to be interesting. And obviously the tiebreaker is strength of schedule against. Right now, the Giants sit at the 5 hole, Chargers 6, Titans 7, Jets at 8 at 6-10. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in a lot of these games. And then as we get the exact draft order after next week, we'll start doing mock drafts. We'll talk about team needs and all that stuff. But as we try to figure out where, I think it's fairly universal who the blue chip players are in this draft class, and try to figure out where they're going to go, and the quarterback specifically, the order here is going to be really key, because if a team that needs a quarterback, Tony, finishes out of that top 4, 5, or 6, they're going to have to move up to get a quarterback. And as we just spoke about with the Panthers last year, that's when things can get very expensive very quickly.
Forget about trade for Carson Wentz, trade to get Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Robert Griffin. These trades, for the most part, where these teams are giving away tons of draft capital, future draft capital.
How about Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson with the Jets, right? They did it twice.
Trey Lance. Zach Wilson was the second pick. It was Trey Lance that San Francisco moved up to and gave away a bunch of first-round picks. Those trades usually don't work out for the team, in favor of the team that's trading up to get the player. It's funny. You talk about the strength of schedule. I'm looking here. The Jets are 6-10. If they beat the Patriots and all those other teams finish 7-10, as the Jets would go from like the 8th pick of the draft potentially to the 12th pick of the draft. So, what do you do if you're a Jets fan? The Jets players don't want to lose. Salah wants to win because he's on the hot seat. But the fans are like, hopefully we lose and we get that 8th pick. But again, you can't, if you end up playing for draft positioning every year as the Jets do, you end up where the Jets are.
Absolutely. And you go back, I mean, that one, I forget, I'm sure you remember what team it was against. They won that game late in the year, and they ended up picking up second instead of first, and they missed that on Trevor Lawrence. So, like you said, you can't play to lose, but sometimes unfortunate things happen as a result of winning those games, and it does hurt teams long term. Tony, Happy New Year, my friend. Enjoy the college football playoffs next week. We'll be back with you guys next Tuesday once again.
Look forward to it, John.
And then we'll know the first draft order, or I guess the first 18 picks in the draft. We'll talk about that. We'll review the College Football National Championship, and then we'll get to some of those Twitter questions as well. Thanks for being with us on draft season. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Taste the Mediterranean through March 19th at Whole Foods Market. Save on animal welfare certified bone and beef short ribs, sustainable wild-caught sockeye salmon, and more. Find sales on Parmigiano Reggiano, charcuterie and ground lamb. Grab an olive boule bread from the bakery. Plus, wines from the Mediterranean start at just $8.99. Taste the Mediterranean now at Whole Foods Market. Must be 21 plus. Please drink responsibly.
Introducing the Lisa Chill Collection, your answer to hot nights. These mattresses beat the heat with ultra-cool covers, whisking away heat for the perfect sleep temperature. Save up to $460 on Chill mattresses and get 2 free pillows when you shop now. iHeart listeners can save an extra $50 off. by visiting leesa.com/iHeart. That's LEESA.com/iHeart. Exclusions apply. See leesa.com for more details.